It begins, as it often does, in the quiet hours of the night. The world is asleep, the room still, and you are a lone face, lit by the pale blue of a screen you can't remember reaching for. There is no urgency, no obvious hunger, only a slow ache, a kind of dullness beneath your skin. You call it desire. You tell yourself it's natural, instinctive, a need like any other. Just one more image, one more moment, one more imagined closeness to fill the silence that seems to stretch longer with each breath. But beneath the surface, something else stirs. The feeling you name as lust does not warm you, it hollows you. The more you reach, the more distant everything feels. The fantasy that once gave a flicker of aliveness now falls flat, like an echo bouncing off a wall too far away to touch. And in the middle of it all, an unspoken truth rises, quiet and sharp. This is not about the body. This is not about want. This is about something missing. Marie-Louise von Franz once wrote that we mistake the call of the soul for the pull of the senses. Because the language of the inner world is often misunderstood, it does not shout, it whispers through longing. It disguises itself as craving, hoping you will notice the absence underneath the appetite. And in this moment, as you stare into the empty glow of your own distraction, you begin to suspect that what you're really seeking is not pleasure, but presence. There is a crack in the ritual now, a pause, a moment where you feel not desire, but the strange ache of disconnection. The sense that the craving is not toward another, but away from yourself. The body still moves through the old pattern, but the heart is watching now, quietly asking, what is this really for? In the mythology of the soul, this is the threshold. The moment the outer pursuit begins to falter, and the inner world speaks, not with answers, but with unease. And if you are brave enough to stay, to feel it fully, you may glimpse the truth that Jung saw, and von Franz spent her life interpreting. The soul, when unheard, cries out through symptoms. Lust is not the message, it is the signal. And so you sit, suddenly aware of the coldness in your limbs, the flatness of your breath, the way your heart beats not with passion, but with distance. The screen dims, the silence grows, and in the space left behind by fantasy, something older, deeper, begins to rise. It has no name yet, only a presence, only a question. What are you truly longing for? You see her, but not really. She is a name, a shape, a voice filtered through imagination. She exists more fully in your mind than she ever could in the world. You assign her meaning. You dress her in your need. The way she looks at you in your fantasy, the softness in her imagined voice, the warmth you believe she'd offer it is not about her. It is about what she awakens in you without ever knowing your name. It feels like connection, but it is not. It is projection, and it is lonely. Fantasy wears the mask of closeness, and it fits too well. It lets you feel without risking anything. You can open without being seen. You can surrender without being touched. In the world of imagination, you are always loved, always chosen, always safe. There is no rejection. There is no realness. But there is also no nourishment. The soul does not feed on images. It starves beneath them. Marie-Louise von Franz warned of the danger in mistaking symbolic projections for relationships. When the inner world is dry, the psyche sends longing outward. You believe you want her, but what you are truly reaching for is the part of yourself you have lost. The anima, the inner feminine, becomes disowned, and so she appears outside you, romanticized, idealized, worshipped. But it is not love. It is the unconscious searching for reunion through illusion. In this illusion, there is safety. You are never truly vulnerable. The fantasy will never disappoint you, never challenge you, never turn away. It's perfect, because it's not real. And that is precisely what keeps you empty. You touch the image, but not the soul. You feel the simulation of closeness, but not the heat of presence. And with every imagined embrace, the distance inside you deepens. What you call intimacy is often a mirror reflecting your own ache. You aren't connecting, you are performing for yourself, projecting the possibility of being seen onto someone who cannot see you. You are scripting conversations you wish you could have, receiving affection you were never given, rewriting an old wound with a softer ending. But when the screen goes dark, when the mind quiets, the void remains. It always does. Because fantasy cannot substitute for contact. Projection cannot replace presence. The illusion may soothe you for a moment, but it cannot hold you when you are trembling. It cannot meet you in your truth. It cannot say, I see you, and mean it. Von Franz knew that the work of the soul is not to chase the image, but to reclaim what the image represents. To go inward. to find the part of you that longs to be touched not by another, but by your own awareness, to see that what you crave is not someone else's gaze, but your own attention, your own truth, your own lover. It begins with a small ache, almost invisible, a boredom that doesn't feel like boredom, a restlessness beneath the surface that you can't quite name. You scroll, you click, you search not for meaning, but for movement, for something that breaks the stillness, interrupts the silence, keeps you from sinking. And the more you chase it, the more you feel like it's chasing you. Lust, distraction, dopamine, dressed as desire. But underneath it all, there is something darker, something older, something that waits. Marie-Louise von Franz called it the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is hidden. It is the part of you exiled from your own light. It holds your unwanted truths, your unmet longings, your unfelt pain. And when you do not turn toward it, it turns toward you. It doesn't speak in words, it acts, it pulls, it seduces you into the same patterns again and again, until the loop becomes identity. The hunger you feel is not for pleasure. It is for wholeness. But the shadow doesn't ask for healing. It asks for attention. And when it does not get it, it finds ways to be fed. Compulsions, addictions, patterns that numb just enough to keep you from seeing what's underneath. You mistake the shadow's appetite for your own. You call it instinct, impulse, even freedom. But it is not free. It is a symptom of everything you have avoided. You tell yourself it's just the body, that you're only human, that you need release. But your body is not hungry, your soul is, and the shadow knows it. It knows how to disguise your grief as lust, your fear as craving, your loneliness as need. It plays the same scene on repeat, and you play your part without noticing that the script never changes. You reach, you take, you finish, you ache. Von Franz taught that the shadow is not your enemy, but your teacher. It shows you where your love has not reached, where your awareness has not looked, where your presence has not dared to go. Every compulsive act is a message. Every craving is a question. And if you could stop long enough to listen, you might hear what it has been asking all along. Not for another screen, not for another fantasy, but for you. The real you, the one who never learned to cry without shame, the one who needed to be held but learned instead to perform, the one who buried emotion and now feels only hunger. The shadow carries your truth not to harm you, but to return you to yourself. So before you reach again, pause, not to resist, but to recognize. The craving is not your failure. It is your invitation. It is not asking for more. It is asking to be seen. And what you do next will not just feed or starve the shadow. It will either bring you closer to your soul or keep you running from it. There is a longing inside you that has no clear name, a craving that surfaces not just in moments of lust, but in every quiet moment when the noise fades and you are left with yourself. You feel it when you reach for her, whether in thought, in fantasy, or in flesh. You believe it is about her, but it is not. It is about something lost within you. Something softer, older, and far more essential. Something you were taught not to need. The feminine Marie-Louise von Franz called it the animata, inner feminine, in men. For women, it is the animista, inner masculine. These are not just ideas, but living forces within the psyche. They speak through dreams, through attraction, through our deepest fears and fascinations. And when they are unconscious, they do not guide us, they possess us. They turn our longing into obsession, our affection into projection. You don't love her, you chase her, because she holds something you have not yet reclaimed in yourself. The anima is not a woman. She is your capacity to feel, to receive, to create meaning. She is the tenderness you repress, the vulnerability you hide, the beauty you admire from afar but cannot embody. When she is disowned, she appears outside you. In women you elevate in desire, in fantasies you confuse for truth. She becomes muse, savior, seductress, and the more distant she is from your conscious life, the more power she holds over you. This is not love. This is longing for your own wholeness. The woman becomes a symbol, a container for everything you do not know how to hold in yourself. You follow her not because of who she is, but because of what she represents. Emotional life, softness, mystery, soul. And yet no woman can carry that for you. No relationship can give you what you will not touch in your own depths. Von Franz warned that when the anima is unclaimed, she distorts reality. She leads you into infatuation, disappointment, addiction to the chase. She blinds you with fantasy because that is all she can do when she is not lived inwardly. The cure is not to possess the woman but to turn back and meet her where she truly lives, inside you. This is where integration begins, when you allow yourself to feel fully, when you let silence speak, and wounds open, and emotion rise without shame, when you sit with the ache rather than escape it. Then, and only then, does the anima stop haunting you through other bodies. She returns to you, and with her, you recover the part of yourself you were never meant to abandon. It was never about her. It was always about you. The you that still waits, beneath the wanting, to be whole again. You think you're dreaming, but you're actually hiding. You close your eyes and build a world where everything feels warmer, clearer, safer. She's there, too, smiling, reaching, understanding you without effort. You imagine what you'd say, how she'd respond, how it would feel to finally be wanted without condition. And for a while, the ache in your chest softens. But when you open your eyes, the world is still the same. And so are you. Marie-Louise von Franz spoke often of the danger in unchecked fantasy. Not because imagination is wrong, but because it can become a refuge from the harder work of becoming real. To fantasize is to feel without risk. And so, the fantasy grows, replacing reality with repetition. You visit it like a chapel, praying to the version of yourself that is always loved, always chosen. And while your soul waits, you stay asleep. In Jungian psychology, the path of individuation is sacred. It is the slow and painful becoming of one's true self, the integration of shadow and light, instinct and spirit, wound and wisdom. It asks for your attention, your discomfort, your courage. But fantasy offers a shortcut, a beautiful detour paved with imagined love, perfect intimacy, effortless validation. It requires no integration. It only asks that you stay hidden. Sexual projection is the most seductive form of this detour. You see her not as she is, but as a vessel for all you've left unclaimed in yourself. You attribute depth to her gaze, purpose to her presence, wholeness to her body, and in doing so, you avoid the inner work of discovering those qualities within your own psyche. She becomes the story, so you don't have to write your own. She becomes the feeling, so you don't have to feel your fear. She becomes the meaning, so you don't have to ask the real questions. But fantasy is a mirror, not a map. It shows you what you long for, but not how to find it. And the more you live there, the more your soul grows hungry, because individuation cannot happen in imagination. It requires embodiment, presence, a willingness to fail, to hurt, to be seen not as your fantasy self, but as you are, raw, incomplete, real. Von Franz never told you to kill your dreams, but she warned against mistaking them for the journey. The dream is the symbol. The work begins when you follow it inward, when you ask not, what would she give me, but, what does she awaken in me that I've forgotten how to live? You don't become whole by building castles in the mind. You become whole by walking barefoot through your inner landscape, where no one rescues you, and everything that matters must be claimed. The pleasure comes quickly now, quicker than it used to. A scroll, a glance, a body framed just right. The surge rises, but it doesn't last. And as it fades, it leaves behind something heavier than before. Not regret exactly, but a hollowness, a kind of fatigue in the soul. You tell yourself it was fine, harmless, a moment. But when you look at your own reflection, or sit in the silence afterward, you feel it again, the quiet ache beneath the surface. Not sharp, just dull and constant. The pleasure soothed nothing. It only covered the hunger for a while. Marie-Louise von Franz would call this the signal of a starving psyche. A spirit reduced to repetition. The body is stimulated, but the soul is untouched. You return to the cycle not because it fulfills you, but because you no longer know where else to go. The stimulation is predictable, easy. It requires nothing of you but a glance, a gesture, a small surrender. And yet, every time, you walk away a little more numb, a little more lost. The high fades faster. The emptiness lasts longer. What once thrilled now barely stirs you. The images blur. The names don't matter. The pleasure is mechanical, detached, thin. And in its aftermath comes something harder to name, a kind of sadness without a cause. A fog that lingers over your mornings. A stillness that feels more like absence than peace. This is not about lust. This is about grief. But you haven't called it that yet. The soul speaks in symptoms when it is ignored. First through restlessness, then through craving, and finally, when no one listens, through despair. You find yourself dragging through the day, disinterested, disconnected, wondering why nothing excites you anymore. The world loses color. Even joy feels muted. And still, you return to the screen, the thought, the image, not because you believe it will heal you, but because you don't know how to stop. Von Franz warned that the psyche cannot be fooled forever. When you replace meaning with stimulation, it begins to rot from within. The heart knows the difference between aliveness and adrenaline. The soul knows when it's being starved, and eventually, it refuses to pretend. Depression sets in not as a punishment, but as a signal that something deep inside you is trying to wake you up. The numbness is not failure, it is information. This emptiness beneath the pleasure is not something to escape. It is the threshold. It is the place where the faults must die so something true can begin. And if you can stay long enough to feel it, not just the craving, but the silence after something ancient within you might start to stir. Not desire, not hunger, but a quiet longing for what is real, for what is yours, for what can only be found when you stop running and begin to listen. There comes a point when even the pleasure turns sour. The desire rises, but it no longer carries promise, it carries weight. The anticipation feels forced, like a performance you've memorized but no longer believe in. You do it anyway, out of habit, out of momentum. But each time, it empties you a little more. Not just of feeling, but of meaning. The act becomes a symbol of everything you've lost. Wonder, presence, connection. The body moves, but the soul is absent. And when it's over, you're not just unsatisfied, you're hollow. Desire used to feel like life. Now it feels like noise. You once mistook it for passion, for drive, for the hunger of a soul alive with purpose. But now, it leads nowhere. Marie-Louise von Franz would say the breakdown has begun, not a breakdown of the ego, but of the illusions that protected it. The psychic structure you built around desire, this temple of fantasy and compulsion, is beginning to crack. And through those cracks, something sacred tries to enter. Meaning. The psyche, when starved of meaning, will cry out through symptoms, and this is one of them. The death of satisfaction, the loss of spark, the moment when more no longer works. More bodies, more stimulation, more noise, none of it reaches you anymore, because what you crave isn't quantity, it's essence. Something real, something whole, something that does not vanish as soon as it's touched. And yet, you keep trying. You revisit old fantasies. You seek novelty. You tell yourself maybe the next time, it will feel like it used to. But the truth is, it won't. Because the part of you that once believed it could be fed with pleasure has awakened to a deeper need. The need to feel your own life, not just react to it. The need to live from soul, not sensation. This is the crisis of meaning, and it is holy. Von Franz believed that real transformation begins when the symbols we once relied on collapse, when desire loses its sweetness. It is not the end, it is the call. The call to descend into yourself, to discover what lives beneath the craving. The longing is still there, but now it aches for something else. Purpose, truth, God, soul. This is not a sign of failure. It is the beginning of authenticity, the death of the false self, and the slow, sacred return to the real. When you no longer want just more, but something other, not escape, not distraction, but meaning. And that, at last, is where healing begins. There is a stillness that follows collapse. Not peace, at least not at first. More like exhaustion. A quiet surrender, not out of clarity, but out of depletion. The cycle has spun so many times it has finally lost its momentum. You no longer feel driven to chase the next high. You are too tired, too empty. And in that stillness, something begins to shift. You do not reach outward. You listen inward. It starts as a whisper, faint, unfamiliar, a dream that lingers longer than usual, an image that returns without explanation, a face you haven't thought of in years. Not a fantasy, but a memory, not a craving, but a question. You begin to notice, not the outer world, but the one within. And the deeper you look, the more you realize, it has always been speaking. You just never knew how to hear it. Marie-Louise von Franz called this the turning point of the soul. The moment the ego, no longer sustained by the outer pursuit, begins to bend toward the inner landscape. You do not understand it yet. You only feel the pull, toward silence, toward solitude, toward something more honest than performance. It is disorienting at first. The old patterns still call to you, but they no longer convince you. And in their absence, the unconscious begins to speak. Dreams take on new meaning. Not just fragments, but messages. Symbols arise: a forest, a burning house, a weeping child. You don't know what they mean, only that they belong to you. They are not distractions. They are reflections. And slowly, you begin to follow them. Not to escape the world, but to understand the one inside you. You feel the ache beneath your compulsions. You see the fear beneath your fantasies. You start to ask not what you want, but what you've lost. Not who you desire, but what part of you they were hiding. This is not about insight. It's about presence. The willingness to sit with the unknown. To let the discomfort unfold instead of numbing it again. The work has begun, not the outer struggle, but the descent, the slow reapproach to the soul. Von Franz knew this was not dramatic, not always profound. Sometimes it is just noticing when you want to run, and choosing, instead, to stay, to breathe, to listen, to feel. And when you do, something ancient begins to stir. Not healing, not yet, but remembering. A knowing that you've carried all along, buried beneath years of noise and hunger. You do not yet know where this will lead, but you know this much. You are no longer chasing, you are returning. And for the first time, the longing feels like a compass, not a curse. It came in a dream you didn't ask for. Not erotic, not dramatic, just quietly haunting. You were walking through a place that felt both unfamiliar and deeply known. A dim room, maybe. A childhood hallway. And there, at the far end, stood someone. Not a lover, not a stranger. You didn't see their face, but you felt them, like recognition rising from the bones. You moved closer, uncertain, afraid, and just before waking, you realized it was you, not the self you show to the world, not the mask that performs, scrolls, copes. This one was raw, younger, still. Their eyes carried the ache you've been trying to avoid with every distraction. Every moment of pleasure that faded into regret. You woke with a weight in your chest. You tried to shake it off, but something had shifted. Marie-Louise von Franz would call this a threshold moment, the beginning of real confrontation. You don't just observe the pain now, you feel it. You don't just acknowledge the emptiness, you sit in it. And what rises isn't lust, or fantasy, or even sadness. It's grief. Grief for the parts of you you left behind when life demanded strength instead of softness, control instead of care, image instead of truth. The lost self doesn't scream. It doesn't seduce. It waits, quietly, under years of defenses, addictions, strategies of escape. It holds your unmet needs, your silenced longings, your unspoken dreams. It is the boy who needed to cry but was told to be brave. The girl who wanted to be seen but learned to hide in charm. The human soul that mistook attention for affection and stimulation for connection. Now, you meet them. Not in fantasy, but in fragments. In tears that come without reason. In memories you didn't realize still hurt. In the stillness that no longer feels empty, but sacred. You thought lust was the signal, but it was just the symptom. The true voice has always been quieter. It speaks not in hunger, but in presence. Not in craving, but in clarity. You don't need to fix anything yet. You don't even need to understand it. All you need is to stay. Stay with this self. Let them speak. Let them weep. Let them remind you of the feeling beneath the performance. The softness beneath the armor. The life beneath the coping. This isn't about becoming new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And as you sit with this lost self, something old and true begins to return. Not a fantasy. Not a rush, but a presence, a homecoming. And you realize, maybe for the first time, you were never broken. You were only divided. And now, piece by piece, you are coming back together. It begins so subtly you almost don't notice. The desire returns, but it's different now. Slower, quieter, no longer a jolt of hunger crashing through your system, demanding release. It rises more like a tide, gentle and steady. You still feel the warmth, the pull toward another. But this time, it's not about escape, it's about meeting. It's about being met. Marie-Louise von Franz spoke of integration as a holy process, not a fixing, but a reweaving. The fragments of the psyche, once torn apart by shame, projection, and compulsion, begin to rejoin. You no longer chase the fantasy to avoid yourself. You've already met yourself. You've held your grief, your need, your innocence. And now, desire is no longer a mask for emptiness. It's a movement toward wholeness. You feel this shift in the way you notice others. You no longer search for someone to fill you, or save you, or carry what you're unwilling to hold. You see them not as objects, but as mirrors, living symbols of what you've begun to recognize in yourself: soul, depth, feeling. You want connection, not control. Intimacy, not intensity. Presence, not performance. Even your body feels different. It no longer tightens in urgency. It opens, listens, waits. You touch more consciously. You speak more slowly. You no longer rush to the peak, to the finish, to the high. Because now, the experience itself is enough. Desire has become a doorway, not an escape route. A sacred fire, not a fever to be extinguished. And when the old cravings return, as they sometimes do, you do not fear them. You understand them. You greet them like familiar visitors, once overwhelming, now tamed by understanding. You ask, softly, what are you trying to show me? What do I still need to feel? Von Franz knew that integrated desire is creative. It builds, it nourishes, it inspires. It doesn't fragment you, it completes you. This is the birth of sacred eros, not the eros of addiction, but of aliveness. The kind that does not take you out of your body, but brings you fully into it. The kind that touches not only skin, but soul. You realize now that what you always longed for was never just pleasure. It was presence. It was to be seen, not as perfect, but as whole. And now, having seen yourself, you can finally offer that same gaze to another, not as a projection, not as a need, but as a gift. Desire didn't die. It evolved. It became conscious. And in that consciousness, it became beautiful. Not because it promises to save you, but because it no longer has to. You are no longer running. You are no longer starving. You are beginning, finally, to love. It doesn't end in fireworks. It ends in quiet, in the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. No climax, no dramatic transformation. Just the soft realization that you've returned back into your body, back into your breath, back into a life that feels like yours. You notice it one morning when you wake and no longer feel that ache, that tension beneath the skin, asking for distraction. You don't need to reach. You don't need to scroll. You're simply here. Marie-Louise von Franz called this the return. The soul, once fragmented by fantasy and craving, slowly gathers itself. Piece by piece, it comes home. Not because it was forced, but because it was welcomed. You stopped running. You turned inward. You listened. And in doing so, the part of you that had always been waiting, the one behind the hunger, was finally seen. This return isn't about perfection. You still feel desire. You still feel longing. But now they are not enemies. They are not shameful. They are signals inviting, not commanding. You feel them rise, and you no longer panic. You no longer search for someone to carry the weight of your unlived feelings. You carry them. You live them. You let them move through you like weatherial, but passing. Alive, but not in control. What once was lust has become a doorway. Not to escape, but to insight. You've learned to ask different questions. Not who will want me, but where have I abandoned myself? Not how do I feel more, but where have I gone numb? The fantasies still visit you from time to time, but now they are teachers, not tyrants. They show you where the soul is still asking to be known. You find your rituals again, not performance, but presence. You write, you walk, you touch not out of need, but out of truth. You no longer seek to consume beauty, you create it. You no longer chase intimacy, you embody it. There is a calmness to you now, a steadiness, as if the ground beneath your feet has returned. And when you meet others, it is no longer through projection. You see them clearly, because you see yourself clearly. Not perfect, not healed, just whole. The self you once scattered in every scroll, every fantasy, every grasping thought. That self is with you now, quiet, breathing, home. Von Franz never promised you escape. She promised you depth. And now you understand why. You were never meant to transcend your desire. You were meant to feel it fully, to follow it inward, to let it lead you not to another body, but to your own soul. This was never about lust. It was about remembering. And now, you remember. Not all at once, not forever, but enough to begin again. And this time, you are not running. You are returning.